Hi, I'm Fernando Vega. I am Vice President of Executive Search at MSearch, and welcome to Ahead of the Curve. This is where we share ideas about current news and help unpack some of the more nuanced aspects of business today. These are items that we cover in our monthly newsletter. Okay, so with me is Ana Maria de Lima. She is our Director of Operations here at MSearch, and in this month's newsletter, we're discussing the differences between competence and capacity. So, kind of following on that, Anna Maria, I am curious to hear how would you define both competence and capacity, and how do you differentiate between the two?
Ooh, um, they're really closely related. And in order for things to actually work, no matter what you're doing, whether you're building an IKEA table or you're running, Fortune 500 business, you have to align those things. Capacity is, your ability to deliver, and your competence is when and where you deliver.
So, the way that I look at the two is competence is what people think of when it comes to experience and skill set. These are the things that you've done that essentially prepare you for whatever the next opportunity may be from a skills standpoint. Capacity has a lot more to do with mindset, in my opinion, right? It's the ability to operate at the highest level of competence, even when things aren't perfect, right? Where there's hurdles that you have to overcome, or where there's uncertainty, or where there isn't a clear answer. And there's a huge difference between the two. There's a lot of people that are extremely competent when everything is perfect, but the minute that things go wrong, they don't have the capacity to continue to operate at that level. And that to me is the biggest difference between the two. So, and it's something that's becoming a bigger issue with business because things are becoming more uncertain as we go, right? And it's a
Mhm.
big part of the hiring process is really assessing not just for competence, but now companies are being more thorough about assessing for capacity just because there is so much instability out there. And, we've seen the studies, right? 40% of leaders, are unsuccessful within 18 months, right? And that's an extremely short period of time. But to me, that's a big issue. And, I think it's helpful to understand that these are highly competent leaders. They just aren't equipped or don't have the capacity to continue to operate at that level during periods of extreme chaos and uncertainty.
Yeah, that's a really good take on it. I like that. What things do you think factor into this like initial, metric for like unsuccessfulness in the beginning as it relates to capacity? Do you think there's like leadership ideas, like a mismatch in expectations between what leader thinks that they're supposed to be and what is actually called for at the moment, or something else?
So I think it all comes down to just a poor assessment throughout the interview process, right? I
Hmm.
think that the interview process in a lot of ways is extremely archaic. People are interviewing candidates today the same way that they did in 1985. Right? And obviously, the world has changed so much in those years. It's funny how certain things happen. And unfortunately, as the world changes, I think that we also need to adapt and modernize our approach to, essentially de-risk the hiring process. And a big issue with it is the way that people are interviewing today. Leaders learned how to interview at the early stages of their career. Maybe they were a manager in the mid 90s, right? And no one has taught them or given them any sort of, just, I don't know, training or whatever it may be to really learn how to interview candidates in today's environment because it is different, right? I think that the skills that we're looking for in a lot of ways are similar, but the personalities need to be very different. And I think that that's one of the bigger issues that we have, and it's one of the reasons why we see so much quote unquote failure in leadership once people are onboarded. But in a lot of ways, it just comes down to communication, and
Hmm.
it's about asking candidates and really understanding how they're going to do under imperfect scenarios, right? Instead of just assuming that, hey, when everything's right, this person can do the job, right? Ask, hey, tell me about what you've done. They're only going to give you the highlights. They're not going to tell you how they did when things got difficult, right? Or when they failed, which I think is a great way to assess candidates. It's really understanding how they respond to failure.
Yeah, like the Star Trek test, something Moreau test where there's no way to win, and what they're really assessing in this, when to become like a Starfleet captain, is how you respond. That's really smart. What are things that companies can proactively do, right? To sort of screen for people's capacity?
So, number one is train your hiring managers on how to properly interview, right? Everyone walks into these meetings and they just ask, hey, tell me about yourself. Well, great. What am I going to tell you? Just the good things about me, right? I think that including scenarios and hypotheticals in the interview process can be extremely valuable because it gives you some insight into how the person thinks, right? How quickly they can pivot if needed and throw a wrench in there every once in a while. Don't make it so linear. It's come up with creative ideas to put them on their toes, right? And see how they respond. And in some cases, it's a matter of, and we see a lot of cross functional interviews. And I think it's using those cross functional interviews in a way to get them to speak with folks that maybe aren't coming from the same discipline, the same function as them, and putting some hypotheticals that maybe they don't understand, right? And really understanding how they do. Are they good about asking questions? Are they good about saying, hey, that's not something that I know, but this is how I would solve that problem? Understanding how they lean on colleagues and other cross-functional leaders is going to be very valuable because especially at the leadership level, it's not something that you're doing on your own. So you can say all you want how great you are at doing something, but at the end of the day, it's how do you leverage your team? How do you leverage the folks around you? And I think that we're not assessing for that in interviews. A lot of it is, hey, tell me about yourself. Tell me about this great thing that you did at this company. And we're not assessing, hey, what happened when something went wrong, right? What happens if you don't have the exact scenario that you had at that company, right? How would you approach it this time around in different market circumstances? So,
As a candidate, how do you think that uh, as an individual leader, not just a candidate, right? Not just people who are looking, but people who are already exactly where they want to be. How do you upskill for that? What would you recommend for someone who's looking to grow their capacity in that way?
I hate to say a lot of it is drop off. Put yourself in
Hmm.
positions where you're uncomfortable, right? Put yourself in situations where things aren't linear and perfectly lined up for you, and you need to practice operating under chaos. And unfortunately, that's something that comes with experience. Listen, there are companies that are very, rigid in the way that they do things, and a lot of days look very similar to each other. Those companies can be great for certain people, but I think if you're going to go into an environment where there is, high chaos, we see this with a lot of startups, we see this with a lot of organizations that are private equity backed and going through extreme transformation. Like, you have to put yourself in position to operate under duress. Otherwise, unfortunately, you're just not built for those types of environments. I think it's okay to self-assess and understand that, maybe you're better suited for a different environment that maybe has a little bit more structure, and that's okay too.
Do you think that's something even outside of a professional like training course that's outside of your specific function could work? Like maybe someone tries rock climbing or, hiking or, parachuting or something different that like shakes things up and introduces new and fresh ideas out of context.
Listen, it can't hurt, right? I think a common example that I hear about is Toastmasters, right? Because everyone is so
Okay.
terrified of public speaking that, going into something like Toastmasters can be beneficial because it puts you in an uncomfortable situation, right? And obviously, the more you do it, the better you get at it, but that helps you overcome fears and it helps you operate under chaos in a better way. So that's an example of it. Yes, there are a bunch of physical things that you could do, right? Try a new sport, right? Try a new workout that you've never done before and see how you do. But all of those things can get you ready and make you more comfortable in uncomfortable situations. But it's stepping outside of your comfort zone is really what you need to do. And there are a million ways to do it, but they're uncomfortable. So people tend to steer away from them.
I have a fun story, and it involves a dance class that I take. I take formal classical ballet, and in our class, in the middle of the semester, gentleman joins the class, and he's an older gentleman, and he's in the ballet class with us, and he's hobbling along as best as we can, and we come to find out that he's actually an executive at a company here locally, and he's doing it because his daughter is taking the children's versions class at the same time, and he wanted to prove to her that you can do things that are difficult and that you don't know. But he was talking about how actually like having a beginner's mindset has unlocked a bunch of things for him professionally. And I was like, I thought that was really interesting and maybe it has applications here too.
Yeah, I would assume that the gentleman's probably pretty successful and he's probably pretty good at his job because of that mindset. And again, we live in a world of constant change. So if you're not accustomed to being uncomfortable, it's just going to be very hard to be successful.
Yeah, no matter what you do, that's absolutely true.
All right. Thank you for listening. Again, I am Fernando Vega. This is Ana Maria de Lima. We are with M Search. We enjoy talking about these sorts of topics and would love to share these sorts of ideas with you. So don't hesitate to reach out and please follow our newsletter.